Ananya Dance Theatre is a company of women of color across races and ages and class and sexuality. It's very important to us to have that range within the women of color constituency. And we make work that brings together artistic excellence and social justice issues. This has been a very hard terrain to negotiate because there aren't many dance companies that bring those two together. For us, those are actually equal weight. It's not kind of like doing social work. That is the space we inhabit as artists. We believe in the values that we're talking about. And we try to remind social justice organizations that as artists, however, our job is not to make laws, move legislation. We talk to audience members and we create a groundswell. We create an empowerment around certain issues. Art is a way of organizing around certain issues. It may not be organizing in huge numbers, but it's certainly organizing the participants in the project, our audience members. We hope to engage. Dance is very unique. There is nothing left after the work. It exists in the moment. Its power is in the moment of encounter between the performer and the audience. So to me, dance has the power to move and to suggest to us different ways of knowing, different ways of being. Dance also works with metaphor, right? So metaphor becomes a way to understand the multiple dimensions around any issue. To me, that's the power of dance. Both the poetry and the force, all those things come together. So dance makes a change, maybe not in terms of numbers that we can check off, but in terms of what happens as people's minds and hearts change over time. Odissi is a classical dance form from the eastern part of India, the state of Odisha. It's very different from several of the other classical dance forms, certainly different from Bharatanatyam, which actually is one of the more popular forms. It's very rounded, and it has a lot of torso movement, a lot of hip displacement, very sculpturesque forms, a lot of complex footwork. And it has a lot, Odissi is also known for the power of its emotional expressivity, what we call abhinaya. So the articulation of an emotional landscape, the invocation of an emotional landscape through poetic bodily metaphors. It's interesting because oftentimes we think of abhinaya, and abhinaya is part of several dance forms, several of the classical dance forms from India, certainly. But we often, in Odissi it's particularly prominent, but we often think of abhinaya as being storytelling. It's not storytelling. It works through the logic of metaphor and abstraction as well, and through suggestion. We talk about sanket and ishara, suggestion. We hint at ideas and we sort of unfold a single idea in many ways. So we share that multiple interpretations are possible of the same idea. That's what Odissi has done a lot of. Through time, and especially in the colonial period, there was complete lack of patronage for the arts. So the dance form really deteriorated, and it's only in the 1950s and 60s that a process called Jayantaka was started by some of the gurus, and they started re-choreographing, reconstructing the form. There was really in the 40s and 50s, I think the Odissi repertoire that was left was about 15-20 minutes only, and now we have hours and hours of work. But it has taken the process of study and reconstruction and a lot of effort. And one of the first things that I remember doing with my guru was traveling to some of the temples and seeing and actually studying the sculptures and then seeing how to animate those sculptures. So if you have one particular what we call bhangi or position, which is Sundari, the woman who adorns herself. Sundari can be here, Sundari can be here, Sundari can be here, Sundari can be here. Multiple versions of Sundari, which we would look at the walls from. And then we would connect all of them, mobilize them, and create a whole dance out of them. But collecting sort of the ideas of how the body can be understood came from that research.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And then how do you make that, how do you make that contemporary? How do you contemporize that?
So, Sundari, for instance, right? This idea of the woman adorning herself. I don't adorn myself like that. I maybe, that's not the focus of my life as a woman right now. So, some experiences are not quite there, and other experiences are. The joy of dance is always the joy of dance. However, there is, I try to think of it in terms of the contemporary lifestyle. So what, to me, when I think of my lifestyle, certainly when I was growing up in Calcutta and now here too, the most common experience is running for the bus, So, and if I'm running for the bus in my sari, okay, what do I need to do? I think about that and how that will mesh with this very clear classical position here. And then somewhere in the middle falls the dance, That's where the dance emerges. I would say the reception in Minnesota is not unlike the reception in New York in the 1990s when I first came to this country. Now people have seen more of Bollywood. And so to understand the range that exists within what we call Indian dance, that in itself requires thought. And then I'm trying to say I'm not doing classical Odissi. I'm taking Odissi and I'm deconstructing it and I'm extending it to make a different form, mixing it with yoga and chow and making a different form, a contemporary form, a feminist form, articulating women's experiences. I would say my audiences have a lot of women. There's something, Odissi is also a very sensuous form, very much about, curvilinearity. And I think women appreciate that. Not that men don't, but somehow there's a way in which a lot of appreciation has come for the form itself. There are some histories, Mark, that are told and some histories that are not told, right? So a lot of histories of women's experiences are not told. They're not marked and they're not written. And then also the stories that are told, someone deemed that they were historic enough to be noted down and some were not historic enough. Who makes those choices? So part of my work, I see it as a performative historicizing, if you will. So the history remains in our bodies of what happened. There are so many stories that have just fallen through the cracks. So for me to make a performance, I'm not telling a real story, but I'm telling a story where many women's experiences might fit in. So for me, it's a moment of historicizing, and it'll stay in our bodies. It doesn't have to go down in history, in the books of history, if you know what I mean. Tradition is interesting. I think we have conflicted relationships with tradition. I certainly have a very conflicted relationship with tradition. When certain kinds of hierarchies also pass in the name of tradition, and that's not so cool. However, when we think of tradition in terms of aesthetic or cultural specificity, that's really important to hold on to, right? So, for me, holding on to the exact dimensions of what is a tribhangi, the threefold position in Odissi, is very important. It's important that in Odissi we don't, in fact, elongate, straighten out the knee as we do in Bharatanatyam. It's always a bent knee. That's important, and we need to keep it as such. So those aspects of tradition, if you will, or specificity are important. Other aspects, such as, the women do all the work, it's not valuable, and it's, they don't even deserve time or thought or energy. The important thing in any dance is to think about your story, how you find your story within it. And the same is true of my work. I'm trying to share my reading of a particular story, but somewhere your story and mine have to meet so we can talk. That's the most important thing. And enjoy the power. Enjoy the power of the footwork and enjoy the bodies that are sweating. This is not about being pretty, but it's about being, for me, it's about communicating something that is deeply felt, something that we have deep passion around. I hope that for future generations, dance is returned to its place as an incredibly powerful medium of communicating ideas. Communicating ideas, the ideas in all their complexity, not a single line idea which can fit into the 49 characters of a tweet, but a complex idea because of its power of metaphor, because it brings forth the body, and you cannot avoid, you can't just see words and say, I'll think about it later. It's an immediacy of connections. My hopes for dance are that it returns to its place of power.